for joining me today. I'm really pleased to be able to present to you the findings from our Prefabrication and Modular Construction Report. I'm sure everyone on the call is at least somewhat familiar with Dodge. A lot of people know us for Dodge Construction Central, our very comprehensive list of projects in the U.S. Hopefully many people on this particular call also are well aware of Suites and the resource that it provides to find information about building products. But a lot of people are less aware of the kind of analytics and data that we provide to the industry, including custom market research and public-facing research on industry trends and insights. And that's really where I specialize in. We've done a lot of different studies on key trends that we think are transforming the construction industry, specifically with an eye on quantifying the business value and challenges of those trends. And the good news is that all that information is available for free on our website. We partner with industry organizations in order to pay for the research and pay for the publication so that we can publish these resources for free. So if you go to construction.com, go to /toolkit/reports, it brings you to a few initial SmartMarket reports currently that you can click on and download. But in fact, if you load more, you have years of research available to you. So if you remember nothing else from this presentation, please remember construction.com /toolkit/reports as a real resource for places you can go to find out about these trends. So today, though, we're going to focus on our prefab and modular report. And I'm actually going to start by just looking at the challenges in the construction industry that prefab and modular can help address. And I'm going to do that through a few different studies that we've conducted over the years that really encapsulate some of the challenges that the construction industry has faced lately. That you'll see as we get into the data, prefab and modular are directly able to impact. So the first one is project performance. We've done several studies on project performance that have demonstrated challenges that the industry still experience with performance on quality, schedule, and budget. But perhaps one of the most compelling ones was one we did with the Lean Construction Institute, where we surveyed owners. We asked them to think of two projects that they'd worked on in the last few years. One that was just a typical project, one that, is pretty typical of what they experience on construction projects in general, and one that was their best project that they had in the last few years. So what this slide reveals is that on a typical project, 49% of the owners said their typical project was completed over budget, and 61% of owners said that their typical project was completed behind schedule. So these are really kind of what owners commonly expect. And even on their best project that they had done in the past few years, there were still 17% who said that they came in over budget and 21% who said that they came in behind schedule. So clearly there are challenges with project performance in the industry. In addition to that, on a different study that we did, Managing Uncertainty, where we interviewed architects, contractors, and owners as part of the overall survey, we looked at the understanding of quality performance, and we saw a notable gap between how the architects and contractors perceive the impact of their projects on the owners, whether or not the owners believe that they've delivered satisfactory performance, versus what the owners said they typically experience in terms of quality. And you can see in particular the differences in those blue wedges, that 49% of the architects and contractors felt that their owners always felt that the quality was satisfactory, and only 20% of the owners agreed. Another key issue that really has been rising to the fore lately, and that we have no idea what's going to happen with in the next few months, is workforce shortages. Up till now, we've seen consistent data from a quarterly survey that we do of contractors that's published in the Commercial Construction Index that demonstrates that nearly all contractors are having moderate to very high levels of challenges finding skilled workers. The remarkable thing about the data you're seeing on this slide is its consistency. And this is, again, those who find the report either medium or high levels of difficulty finding skilled workers. In that same study, we also ask on a quarterly basis about the impact of those skilled labor shortages. And you can see, just focusing on the purple Q4 bars, that 73% of owners say they're of contractors say that they're challenged to meet schedule requirements. 66% said they put in higher bids for projects, and 42% are turning down opportunities for work. So obviously this is impacting both the fact that we see so many project delays out there, and they're also impacting the cost of construction. And then finally, all of the influences that seem to be driving the interest in prefab and modular these days are not necessarily negative. Technology, and BIM in particular, has been a critical driver towards greater interest in these methodologies. Now, just to give you one example, we did a study of owners, largely in the healthcare sector, because our partner on this particular report was the VA. And we surveyed owners and asked them, if the owners that knew that BIM was being used on their projects, to what degree they saw outcome improvements based on the use of BIM. You can see there's a wide list of both established and maturing benefits. But at that point, this study is several years old now, 40% of the owners reported that they saw a high or very high reduction in site labor due to the increased offsite fabrication. So for them, that was a moderate level benefit. But what's interesting is when we said, okay, now look out for the next 5 years. You can only choose one positive outcome. Given the same list of different positive outcomes, what do you expect to see most? You have the biggest impact from the use of BIM on your projects. In fact, the highest percentage of owners picked reduction of site labor due to increased offsite fabrication. So this is something that owners were very interested in and very, very engaged in. And we see that contractors are also point to model-driven prefabrication in a different study that we did as one of the top 5 BIM activities that they employ during construction. So all of that is just a setup for looking at this study and why we felt that this issue was so important and why we were so pleased to be able to launch a study in this right now. So I'm going to give you just a few details about the study, and then we'll dive in. We'll look at how the use of prefabrication and modular construction in the industry, the impacts it's having on projects and companies, and the drivers and obstacles to wider use. So this was a pretty broad-based study. We landed up with 608 total respondents, but it's very important to understand how it was done. It was an online survey, but we wanted to get into a lot of detail, which, by the way, I am not going to be able to present. This is just a high-level findings. So I do encourage you to download this study from construction.com and take a closer look at the findings, because there's a lot that I don't have time to talk about in a presentation like this. But we got into some really interesting details about both prefab and modular construction, and we realized very early on when we wanted to examine this issue closely that we needed to actually split the responses into 2 tracks. So we asked at the beginning if they have experience in prefabrication and modular construction, and to what degree of experience they have. And those who had a high level of modular experience were put into the modular track. Those who said that they had a high level of prefabrication experience, a moderate to high level, were put in the prefabrication track. And those are the only ones who participated. So all 608 respondents had done either prefabrication or modular construction in the last few years. And we landed up with about a third going into the modular track and about 2/3 going into the prefabrication track. So what you're going to see, you're never going to see any adoption numbers. Every percentage that you're going to see in what I'm going to present moving forward is going to be those who have said that they have experience with prefabrication and modular construction. And I do want to take a pause to really thank the partners. And the partners in this particular project were essential. Bradley was the initial group to invest in this study. They were the ones who enabled all of it to happen. And then the Modular Building Institute came in as our other premier partner. For supporting partners, Pinnacle Infotech and MCAA were critical, and Skender was also a key funder of the report. And then we did rely on partners to help us distribute the survey, including the Modular Building Institute, MCAA, and all of the research partners you see, which gave us a really nice spread of trades and additional contractors, in addition to our own Dodge resources. All right, so now that we've done all this setup, it's time to dive in. Let's look at the use of prefabrication and modular construction, and we're going to start with prefabrication. We looked at two different common types of prefabricated activity. One is prefabricating single trade assemblies, and among those who do prefabrication at all, in the past 3 years, 62% report that they've done single trade assemblies on 10% or more of their projects, but less than half of them are doing them on more than 50% of their projects. And we see that the overall engagement in the next 3 years with single trade assemblies is expected to increase. That overall 75% say that they're going to do 10% or more of their projects on this. But we see the ratio of those doing more than 50% of their projects and 10% to 50% stays about the same. So we just see a general level of overall increase in the industry. With prefabricated, the other area we asked about was prefabricated multi-trade assemblies. These are a little bit less common than the single trade assemblies currently. If you look at what's been done in the last 3 years, 1/3 of the respondents who do prefabrication at all have done them on more than 10% of their projects. And that's clearly split between 1/3 and 2/3 who are doing it at, 2/3 doing it on 50% or fewer, and 1/3 just doing it on more than 50% of their projects. And again, we see the ratio stay about the same when they look at what they're going to do in the next 3 years. Although we do, but really where we see the biggest level of growth is in that 10 to 50% range, that nearly doubles. And so clearly more people are interested in working on including multi-trade assemblies more in their projects, but it's still in the more the emerging stages. All right, let's shift to modular. We actually asked about 4 different types of modular construction, but for this particular presentation, I'm just going to focus on 2. The first is panelized construction, things like wall panels. And again, these percentages are just those who already do modular. So we're not saying that 48% of the industry have used panelized construction on 10% or more of their projects. We're saying among those who do modular, nearly half have used this on 10% or more of their projects. And we see a moderate level of growth expected in the next 3 years, with growth both in those doing 50% or less or more than 50%. The other one that we looked at is 3D modules in full volumetric construction. And here we see that about 44% said that they're doing it currently on at least 10% or more of their projects. But we do, again, see a big increase mostly in that 10 to 50% range. Again, mostly with people thinking that they are going to start using this on some of their projects within the next 3 years. So definitely growth and intensification in the use of these methods across the board among those who use them. All right, so that's just basic use. How are they being used? What are the building types, for example, in which prefab and modular are being used? We did find the results somewhat similar for prefabrication and modular. So what we did is we created an index that combined the findings both from the prefab track and the modular track to look at where both of these were being likely to be used most frequently. And the index numbers are scaled from 1 to 100. So obviously 82 for healthcare facilities, very high level of expected use within the next 3 years across all of the survey respondents. And really, when you look at the top 4 that emerged, there's no surprises here. We all know that prefab and modular are widely used right now in healthcare facilities, and that they're going to continue to be is no surprise. Hotels and motels, we did see a pickup in terms of that was the biggest category to grow in terms of how much it's being used now and how much it's expected to be used in the future. Multifamily, again, another well-established area for these types of construction. And then college buildings and dormitories is the final one. So that these four are where a lot of the activity is expected to happen is no surprise. However, the middle of that range, that index range, also includes some areas that perhaps are less frequently associated with prefab and modular, including offices and commercial warehouses, K-12 schools, and public buildings. And I want to pause on this just for a second. You know, if you think about what would drive people into being interested in using prefab and modular for these areas, with offices and commercial warehouses, bear in mind as we see the findings on the impacts of using these methods, that schedule is a critical factor, right? The sooner that owners can get these properties functional, the sooner they can start earning rent, lease, and often they have, you know, short windows where they own these projects. So getting a longer operating history is critical. So I think that is a big factor that's driving more people to look at offices and commercial warehouses as potential areas to use these methodologies. With the K-12 schools and the public buildings, you have the public work is particularly important to have reliable cost estimates and reliable schedule estimates. So bear that in mind as well. And then finally, when we look at use of prefabrication and modular, we've also examined the degree to which BIM is being used. I already presented it as a possible driver towards engaging in these activities, and you can see that the vast majority of those who took the survey were engaged in at least some model-driven prefabrication and modular projects. However, it's not necessarily common across all of them. You can see that only about a quarter say that they actually engage in model-driven prefabrication on over half of their projects, and only about a third of those doing modular construction say the same about modular. But we do see a heavy level of growth expected in terms of engaging in those who are really using model-driven prefab and modular on the majority of their projects. All right, so that's use. Next, we want to look at the impacts. You know, what are people actually getting out of using these methods? And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to focus on prefabrication, and we're going to look at the core metrics first. Things like schedule and budget, the key things that, you know, the industry really does struggle with achieving. And with prefabrication, and with most of these, what we find out is that the different players have very different experiences of these benefits. In prefabrication, it's really the trade contractors who are seeing a vast improvement on their schedules. Not only are almost 3/4 of them seeing some decrease in schedule based on their use of prefabrication, but 1/3 are seeing those decreases by more than 10%. I do also want to point to the GCs and CMs. Over half are seeing improved schedule performance on their projects as well. Definitely a substantial amount. We see a less enthusiastic response from the architects and engineers. When it comes to budget performance, we see a somewhat similar picture in that the trades are again the ones who are really seeing budget improvements based on their use of prefabrication. And again, we have 38% who report decreases by more than 10%. However, when it comes to budget, here we see that over half of the architects and engineers are also seeing an improvement, and over half of the GCs and CMs. So budget performance overall is very strong, and over 30% across the board are reporting those decreases of more than 10%, those really substantial decreases. All right, so let's look at the same data for modular construction. And here we see a shift in terms of the player who sees the biggest benefit from modular. In this case, it's the general contractors and the construction managers. 88% of them report seeing at least some schedule improvement, and 40% report seeing that their schedules decreased by more than 10%. I would like to point out too that nearly 2/3 of the architects and engineers are seeing schedule performance improvements as well. And in this case, with modular, it's the trades who are least likely to see that kind of schedule improvement. Again, with budget, we see even stronger performance for GCs and CMs, 91% and nearly half say those budget decreases were more than 10%. And we see almost half of architects and engineers and trades did experience some improved budget performance. We also noted that using BIM is an important factor that helps with achieving these performances. It's distinctly correlated with improved schedule performance and improved budget performance. You can see that 30% or less of the companies not using BIM experience either. But when you start using BIM lightly on less than 50% of your projects, already you see an enormous increase. It goes up to almost half who see these improved schedule and budget performance. Now for budget, it appears the big difference is using BIM and not using BIM. But for schedule, the intensity of BIM use is definitely correlated with improved schedule performance, with 60% of those who use BIM on 50% or more of their projects reporting that they're seeing improved schedule performance. And these core factors were not the only ones we asked about. We also wanted to know whether or not they experienced other benefits. And this was just, did you have experience this benefit from BIM? That's what from the use of prefabrication and modular. That's what these percentages represent. So you can see that the vast majority, 89% of those using prefab and 93% of those using modular report that there's improved productivity on their projects. We see improved quality reported by 90% of both. Increased client satisfaction reported by 80% of those using prefabrication and 86% of those using modular. Now, if you think about it, that makes sense, right? Because of course your clients are going to be more satisfied if your budgets are coming in better, your schedules are coming in better, and your quality is improved. And then finally, improved safety is also a key benefit. And there are actually several other benefits that are included in this part of the study that it is worth noting. I wanted to give you a quick example from one of the case studies that we featured from Union Flats in Union City, California. Union City is in the Bay Area of near San Francisco. And obviously, housing that is not incredibly inflated in price is a priority there. And as you know, they're still building housing in that area precisely for that reason, even with the COVID-19 shutdowns. So there was grant money available to create housing that would have affordable market rate prices. But if they had real restrictions on this grant about when the housing had to be available to people, and the schedule would have been impossible to meet with a stick-built project. So they decided to really experiment and use a modular approach. And they were able to put together this 388 wood frame module building in time to get the grant money. And the grant money was the only thing that was making this project affordable in the first place. And at the same time, achieve a LEED Platinum rating, which really goes to the quality. All right, so let's now move to the drivers and obstacles for wider use. And as with some of the benefits, we do see, especially with the things that led people to use prefabrication and modular construction up to now, we see real differences between the different players. So I'm going to walk you through each players for this. And we're going to look at first prefabrication and then modular. And for each of them, we're first going to look at, well, why have they built it up till now? Why use these methods up till now, since they're all users of these methods? And then what would encourage them to increase their use in the future? So for the architects and engineers, clearly improving productivity and improving cost performance are at the top. But I do want to point out what these percentages are. What you're seeing is a rating of one on a 5-point scale. This is high, very high benefits achieved. Okay, not benefits achieved, factors driving really high, very high influence of these factors. And so really less than half of the architects and engineers point to any of these factors as highly influential, which was a little bit surprising and not consistent with the other firms. When it comes to the GCs and the CMs, 66% say that improved productivity was a highly influential factor driving them to use prefabrication, and another 57% said remaining competitive was highly influential. And then around those that are in that, mid-range 40% grouping, improved cost performance, workforce shortages, and safer working conditions were all rated at that moderate, a moderate percentage rating it at that high level. We look at the trades. Remember that the trades were the ones who were seeing the biggest benefits from prefabrication. It's not surprising that they were driven to use prefabrication over the last 3 years. 77% said that improved productivity was highly influential in their decision. 69% said they felt it helped them remain competitive. So, really, this is almost becoming table stakes for some trade contractors. Improving cost performance, 63% noted that, and safer working conditions, 58%. And even the lowest one out of this particular group of 5 was only was nearly 50%. What was not that influential in the driving prefabrication was owner demand. Owner demand does not seem to be a key influencer on why any of the 3 types of players are actually pursuing prefabrication up till now. All right, what would drive additional use among these people who already use it in the next 3 years? Improved schedule performance and decreased construction costs. There's general agreement, pretty much the same ratings across the board from all 3 of the architects, engineers, GCCMs, and trades. Improved quality is also really important to the architects and engineers. And helping with deal with skilled labor shortages is moderately important. It's, a decent percentage say that this would drive them to use it among the contractors. All right, now we're going to do the same thing with modular construction. First, we're going to look at the factors that drove them to use it in the last 3 years, and then we're going to look at what is going to drive them to increase it in the next 3 years. So with the architects, we again see improved productivity, remaining competitive, and improved cost performance as high performing, but we see that a higher percentage of architects and engineers now are rating these as highly influential, especially improved cost performance, well above 50%. When it comes to the GCs and CMs, there's really one key factor that most consider highly influential, which is improved productivity. But in fact, the GCs and CMs are pretty optimistic across the board, with about half picking all of the other major categories, including remaining competitive, safer working conditions, workforce shortages. Owner demand, slightly higher, notably higher for both architects and engineers than it was for prefab. All right, so now let's look at the trades. The 2 things that are most critical to the trades that have driven them to use prefab and modular in the last 3 years is improved productivity and remaining competitive. And they are also driven towards modular for safer working conditions, owner demand, and improved cost performance, about 50%. But here, unlike in the last one, we see that it's really the general contractors who tend to be the most enthusiastic, especially about improved productivity and safer working conditions and workforce shortages. All right, so what's driving use in the next 3 years? It's very similar to the prefab findings. Improved schedule, decreased construction costs, general agreement across the board. Again, architects also point to improved quality as an influential driver by more than half. But in this time, the trade contractors agree, and they're at that same level as the architects. And skilled labor shortages, we see nearly 50% of the contractors saying that these are very influential drivers for the next 3 years. All right, so that's what's driving it. Let's take a quick look at the obstacles. Now, there wasn't as much variation across the players with some of the obstacles, so it makes more sense to look at the obstacles from the perspective of bringing all the data together and using, again, a 1 to 100 index to tally up the results. And you can see that on a scale of 1 to 100, that all of these 5 top obstacles are widely selected as influential. And the top one is project delivery method prevents effective prefabrication planning. Bear that one in mind when we move on to some of the later data. In addition to that, it was just the contractors, the GCs and the trades, who were asked whether or not prefabrication not being part of the project design was a factor. And they think this is an enormously influential factor. And there's also general agreement that the project types not being applicable for prefabrication is another key factor. There's also some concern about whether or not prefabrication shops are available locally and whether or not there's the right kind of trained workforce to install those kind of components. All right, so that's prefabrication. Now let's look at the same sort of indexed finding for modular. And here, the number one by far is that the owner is not interested in a modular approach. Remember that owners were considered a bigger driver than for modular than they were for prefab. They're also a bigger obstacle. So getting owner engagement for modular appears to be a critical factor moving forward. Availability of modular component manufacturers. Okay, it ranks much lower than some of the obstacles we saw in the overall index, but it's still by far number 2, and it's a much higher level than the availability of the prefab shops or even the workers, the skilled workers who could put in prefab. So this availability of modular component manufacturers is a bit of an issue in the industry still. And note that project delivery method still ends up at about the middle range, as does the project types not being applicable for modular construction. But how much less important that project types not applicable is than the availability of the modular component manufacturers and getting owners engaged. All right, now I want to poke at that idea of delivery methods and how important they are as an obstacle. So we did actually take a bit of a deeper dive in the survey on looking at, okay, well, what kind of delivery methods are being used on these projects? And they were asked to rank their first, second, and third most frequently used. For prefabrication, it is design, bid, build. Traditional design, bid, build is by far the most frequently used, but closely followed by design, build. We see that flipped in the use in modular, with design build being the number 1 and traditional design bid build coming in second. We also said, okay, those of you who have experience with these different delivery methods for these approaches, we gave them a 5-point scale and asked them to rate them in terms of the degree to which the delivery method either helped enable the project, the web prefabrication or modular, or hindered it. And so what you're seeing in these bars is those who have experience with using integrated project delivery or design build or construction manager at risk, and who said that either it helped or helped significantly enable the use of prefabrication. And you can see that both design build and integrated project delivery are a very significant percentage believe that when those delivery systems are there, it really helps enable the use of prefabrication. And still 67% say CM at risk enables it. Interestingly though, remember it was a 5-point scale, and they could also point to the degree in which it was hindered by these methods. Only 18% of those who use design, bid, build actually felt that it hindered their use of prefabrication on any of their projects. So while perhaps it doesn't help as much as these more collaborative approaches, there's certainly, the industry is certainly able to overcome that with prefabrication. And we see similar findings when it comes to modular. First, we see again, the more collaborative methods are those that help the most. And we also see that design, bid, build, only 20% felt that it actually hindered their project. We also talked to owners about what was driving them to use these approaches. And so the reasons for using modular that the owners pointed to, schedule compression was one that came up frequently. And you can see the quote that they can get more, that they can be more profitable on these projects due to the schedule compression. Quality. By the way, we spoke to 7 owners on this. They covered a variety of different project types, from multifamily to healthcare to hospitality. And quality was another big factor that drove owners to use modular construction. Labor issues were, especially for those who were in high-cost labor markets, were a key factor. And the desire to be innovative was something that we didn't ask in our standard survey, but something that a few of the owners brought up. This idea that these are the ways that the construction industry is improving, and they want to be on the cutting edge of them. When we asked the owners about the challenges that they saw, there was slightly less unanimity around certain challenges. Most of these were only mentioned by one or two, but they're worth pointing out. The one most frequently mentioned was, again, that idea that there just aren't enough modular companies out there. Not only is there a limited supply chain, but there's more automation is needed among the modular companies that are out there to fully make them a great choice. Cost estimation was another thing, that the way we cost projects now doesn't really take into account the type of benefits that modular and prefab can bring into a project, and traditional financing for construction projects. Lenders don't understand them yet. More experience with these kind of work will help with those latter two bullets. And I do also have a quick example of another project where, again, they made the decision to build using prefab, but in this case, it wasn't about schedule, although they got huge schedule benefits. It was about the cost of labor. That they were building this section of Delaware that had a massive amount of construction going on right when this project was going on, and they really felt that if they were going to compete for labor, it was going to slow down the project and dramatically increase the cost. And instead, they had the MEP racks built off-site. As you can see, they were substantial racks, and they were built in 4 months instead of 9 months. And they also did a prefabricated central utility plant. So to wrap up, these are our top findings: that there's new interest in prefabrication and modular is encouraged by several current trends in the industry. The need for better performance, workforce shortages, and the use of BIM are the three that we've really seen as critical areas that are drawing attention to these approaches. That building types for prefab and modular are likely to expand beyond healthcare, residential, and hospitality, even though those are also expected to grow. That most find prefab and modular improves budget and schedule performance, increases productivity, improves quality, and increases client satisfaction. And that really is just a short list of a rather substantial list of benefits that most of those who do these projects feel that they are getting from these approaches. That the use of BIM likely increases it's really directly correlated with improved budget and schedule performance. And that important KPIs like schedule, cost, and quality are key drivers to increased use of prefab and modular in the future.